So someone asked if I would break down what we had to do. This is just us personally to go from a dedicated server to having our game, the Anacrusis, be available even if our company closes down. And so with that, I'm going to talk about this. This is not complete. I'm sure I'm missing some things. If you have some questions or want some clarification, there's a bunch of different ways to approach this. And so I want to just be clear. This is our approach. And this is what we've done. So now, if you don't know, the Anacrusis, when we launched and we were on, we're cross-platform, first of all. That's important, that we're cross-platform with Xbox. And we launched on Game Pass and Steam with the idea being, while we slowly grew our Steam base, we would have all of these people that you could matchmake to on Game Pass, which was kind of a valid point and kind of not a valid point. And there's a whole business thing I could talk about some other time. But that was the goal. And so with that, we had dedicated servers, and you did a bunch of stuff to unlock items in our game. And so that was how we originally started. And we quickly realized that this was a mistake and we shouldn't be doing this. Everyone's got a plan till they get punched in the mouth. We had a backup plan though. And so we moved to the backup plan, and that was moving the game from these dedicated servers where you got essentially not item drops, but you earn these items, to the more traditional peer-to-peer relationship. But now think about what peer-to-peer really means, right? It isn't like you just, here's the game, go find matches. You still need something central, right? Because you have all of these little clients out there in the world, and they're going, hey, I want to play a game, I want to play a game, I want to play a game. How do they know they exist? You can't just go scan through every single IP in the world. You need some way for them to know to exist. And so you have something central that's like, hey, I'm looking for a game, I'm looking for a game, hey, we're looking for the same game, let's get together. Okay, now you're together. But now how you can actually play together is there is a bunch of stuff that you got to punch through firewalls and a bunch of just crap you need to do. Now, a lot of people will just do matchmaking on Steam out of the box, but Steam does not support crossplay. Unofficially, kind of, and that's, I think, gone away. So they don't support it. And there's a bunch of other services that do, like I have friends who own Pragma. They've done a bunch of big games, right? There are a bunch of things, names of people who I love who are very sweet people. But if I mention their name, you're going to get all angry because they've been in the news because they had problems that someone launches, right? It's a complicated problem. But there's a lot of vendors in this space that offer it. And so we went with somebody who helped us do this. And they have this central point that people can match into. And then they could find each other. Well, that had two problems. One, it had a cost associated with it, which means that we were going to have to pay that even if our game went under. And two, while it kept the same infrastructure we had before and made it really cheap to switch, it had some other problems with it. And one being, when we did a free weekend, it did, if it was the first time you loaded the game, you wouldn't match into a game. As you might suspect, that's a bad bug for a free weekend and colored a lot of people's opinion out of our game. What do you do? That's the way it goes. Okay, but those kind of things are going on, and we're looking at it, and the game's not hitting. It's not a big success, right? Like, we're not knocking it out of the park. And so we have to start thinking, and there's some really hard things you need to think about. And this is when anybody tries to like jump on me about like the game and, oh, it sucks. Yeah, blah, blah. Dude, I had to sit and stare in the mirror and go, should we spend money that we don't have to try to make this better and salvage it? Or should we shrink down, spend a chunk of my own personal money on making sure, A, we ship out of early access because I don't want to be one of those people, and then make sure that we set it up that as long as something exists, the game's still playable. Because it's a multiplayer game. The funnest way to play it is with other people. Just making it a single player game, right, which is why that enters the conversation, isn't that interesting. That's all. I could talk about, there's a whole video I can do about that conversation. That's a really hard conversation to have. And there's probably people who say I'm a bad business person for making the choice that I made. And that's fine, because that choice we made was, let's move off of that back end, and we have to go to another back end that will exist without us paying it. But now here's a couple of problems where this gets problematic. One, We have to say those backends are going to exist. So I think Steam, if Steam goes under, we're in a lot of trouble in general. So I'm willing to make that bet. But be clear, that is saying it's not really forever. It's for as long as Steam exists, right? The second was I did not want to have to require a login. No one wants another additional account, right? Nobody wants the first time you go to play the game, you're like, give us your email. We won't actually email you, but and the reason why they do that is because of legislation. And that legislation is a beautiful law, and it's the right to be forgotten. So if you collect information, personal information, that is either displayed back to the user in the form of a username or something else or an icon, you need to be able to let them remove that. You need to let them be able to edit that. And that means you need to create an account. So how do we do this without creating an account? Well, we have a very brilliant engineer who figures a way to do it and maintain crossplay, which is the other thing, which none of these services officially do, but we do. So we do that. Okay, that is awesome, right? That is super awesome. You don't need to log in. It just all happens in the background and does it. And you're like, but wait, you still can have names and icons. Yeah, but that's Steam's problem, and Steam can deal with all of that stuff and log in. No one minds that. Or EGS, and EGS can do that, or Xbox can do that, right? They all can individually do that. I don't need to create an additional ID, right? So when you get mad at a developer for having to create that additional ID, remember that additional ID is because of legislation. And that legislation I agree with, but legislation also adds friction to the process of the game. That's what it tends to do. All right, so that's fine. That's fine, right? Because even like us little devs who don't want to collect your information and build this giant database like the big publishers do, it still affects us, and that's fine. That's fine. So we have that going. But now we have the problem of how do we give item servers out? Because I'm not going to keep paying for the item server after a while. Well, here's the deal. That's why they're tied to achievements. We still wanted that thing of coming back and getting more stuff and unlocking things and having cool things. But the only way to do it for us, and there's a bunch of different ways we could have done this probably, right? I'm not saying that, right? But I'm saying for us, we tied it to achievements as a way to do it because, again, saying this backend is going to continue to exist. So if that backend is going to continue to exist, achievements. I think that probably ticked off some people, but probably not others, right? And then the other important thing, and this was a lot of talking with the lawyers, was, but what happens if the company really goes under? So now, if you don't know, I've opened up my game to the community, and the community has access to build servers and perforce servers so that they can make changes that I don't supervise. This is the experiment of what do we just gave the game to the community. Ends up, there's a lot standing between the idea and the reality. And that is what we're going through. And that is the practice of it, because it ends up. So let's say you're going to just give out the server code. And excuse me if this is a little scrambled, right? I'm not going to rehearse this. But let's say you just give out all the code. Well, who's operating Steam account that this is all connecting to? Now, sure, you can create other kinds of matchmaking. You can do all kinds of other stuff, but there's still some central thing that needs to exist, right? There needs to be an entity. So in our case, if the company went under, it would go bankrupt under. My lawyer was like, or you could just walk away, sell the game to yourself for $1. Maybe I'd have to talk to all my investors so everybody understood why I was doing that. But so then I would be the entity that was on Steam that owned the game that could have the matchmaking still work. But there still needs to be an entity there. And that is one of the problems when we talk about this stuff is there still needs to be that legal entity there because like for our game, it's a very small game, but we use like Vivox for in-game communication. Sure, we could pull that out and people just tell people to use Discord. That is not a big thing, but we can also just leave it in. But we also have like art in the game that we purchased. Some of it we purchased at the asset store. Oh no. And some of it we paid people to make. Every company does this. But the license we have with paying for it to be made says, hey, we can't just take that asset and put it up on Fab or some other place to try to just sell it. We can't just make it generally distributed, right? And we honor and respect the artist that created it. And so we're not going to do that. Instead, we would need some legal entity that says, hey, I'll still honor that and still make sure about that. I won't just give it out. right? And the same thing, like, I'll tell you what, a lot of times with games in particular, the reason why they get yanked and they don't exist anymore is simply because of music and music licensing. Now, as somebody who was part of the team at Portal, on Portal 2, who bought the national song, we actually literally bought the song and then gave it back to the band because we wanted to have clear legal rights to it and not have this impede us later. But this is a really common thing. And that's why we stopped and we said, oh my God, how do we do this? Right? And this is it. And so for us, we bought it. And in fact, that year, Gabe, when he was sending out like the kind of the end of the year email and talking about bonuses and stuff, said, hey, Chet got his bonus as the national song. If anybody wants his bonus, just let me know. I've seen that in an email. It's pretty funny. But right, because all of this, though, is saying there's a preservation side of games and there's the access to end of life. So the preservation side of games is like an easier thing because you can think of museum in your head. And I've worked with museums, right? Like I think it was the V&A and a couple of others where we actually had to make sure that we gave them hardware and hardware, right? Meaning the hardware, the headset, and then the hardware, the computer to run it so that it could enter into their long-term exhibits and it would be available if they wanted to show it later. Because that's real preservation, right? If you just say, hey, you can show it once, that's not preservation, that's displaying. And if you were ever in Seattle and you went to the Living Computer Museum for some kind of VR exhibit, it's either probably the organization that I was an advisor for or Valve itself that was sponsoring it there because we try to support that organization and keep it going. The problem is the Living Computer Museum had this problem of trying to also do this of hardware and software, and they needed attendance, and where it was in the neighborhood it was in just wasn't taking off, and it just didn't happen. But I would love to have seen more eyes on that, and I tried to do that, failed, right? Okay, so I think we can kind of understand some of like the legality and the problems around this, right? And so then you're like, well, okay, well, how do you, so this has, you can solve it for yourself by just selling yourself the game for $1 or going entirely bankrupt and then coming out of bankruptcy, which actually costs money, and having this exist, right? And it'll just continue on to exist. Okay, sure. But now that's not broadly fixing this problem. So what if I wanted to broadly fix this problem? How would I approach that? And I'm going to say this. There's a million ways to approach this. There are. But I'm saying the goal I have is preservation and end-of-life access. And I'm going to make some rules around this. Preservation can be a video, can be anything. So that's easy. End-of-life access, I think, means not only can you play the game, but you can play it in a way that it was meant to be played, right? If I'm just walking around and here, our Discord plays old games all the time. We have game night and we purposely play old source games in particular. So we were playing Neo Tokyo. No one plays it anymore. So we purposely host a server so people can have that experience of playing it. Because again, these kind of things are important to me. And so I spend time doing them. And so one of the things is hosting these servers. They're a pain in the ass because Steam might do an update that breaks it. Source Engine might do an update that breaks it. Now, they're all doing updates for good reasons because they're worried about hacking. They're worried about some other kind of problem, right? But so we make those accessible to it because that's the way I think these games should be experienced. And so if you're really talking about end-of-life access, if you're not thinking about like how you do matchmaking and how you get into the games and play it, when I say matchmaking, I want to be clear. Like our matchmaking is as simple as you give you a lobby code, which is every game should have a lobby code, and you just put that lobby code in, and then you could join that lobby. Like, so it's not like, I'm not talking complicated ELO or anything like that, right? Really simple. But I think if we're talking about having end-of-life access, that is the kind of access that you really want to have. I think we can agree, right? So like putting some parameters around what we're shooting for. Preservation, we're just going to kick down the road and say, we can do that. We can do that today. We just need a place to put it. Whatever, we can do an online museum of videos. YouTube, it's a museum. Not exactly, right? And I really like what we did with the V&A, where you get to go and play it and actually have that experience. I think that's way better preservation. But can we agree that preservation's easy? So it's end-of-life access that we're talking about. So while got the solution for me, let's talk about some ways that we could talk about having that be a more broad solution for people. Okay, sorry, I had to take a break there. Some spicy potatoes. So excuse me if my eyes are watering. Those are good. Had to have some breakfast with Boris. Okay, but so like, what's a more general approach to this problem? Because I just detailed kind of like things we had to do to get here, and now we're not even really here, right? Well, so like there's a concept of receivership, I think it's called legally, where it's a disinterested third party that holds these things. But really what you want, I think, to do is form a charity that's a nonprofit that says we're about preserving access to online games. Because again, remember, the online ability to play is an important part of that. And that entity then would be the one who's beholden to any copyright violations, licensing, or anything else. It kind of solves a bunch of problems, creates a bunch of problems too. But don't start that charity yet, right? Because how you typically do these kind of things, in my experience, other people could have other experiences, is you don't look at the industry that you're trying to work with as the opposition, but you look at them as partners that you want to work with and solve a problem, right? So this becomes very clear that there's a difference between caring about end-of-life online access for games and an initiative which I think would be punitive to developers. And now, why do I think it'd be punitive to developers? Because how does legislation work, right? You get proposed, and I know. This is the weird paradox of the conversations I have on this, is it's both vague and can be anything. It's just the start of a conversation, and it's super detailed and pedantic, and you got this point wrong. And those are not the same person, clearly. But nothing I say about how it's pedantic will solve the vague guy, and nothing I say about the vagueness will solve the pedantic guy's issue, right? And they're still just going to yell at me. I don't try to solve that, and that's why I'm not engaging in the document or the details of the idea. Because what happens with legislation is it goes to legislation. And there they go like, hey, we should get some industry experts. Let's dig into this. Let's talk about this. Let's figure this out together. And then that's where you get exceptions, and that's where you get things like, hey, if you're going to make a multiplayer online game in the EU, let's require that you have $1 million bond, because that will be punitive to all the small developers. Sure, if you're EA, wouldn't you do that? Wouldn't you eliminate Lethal Company, or Lethal Company would have to come to you and say like, hey, can you be my publisher of record? This is why these things exist. Can you be my publisher of record because I can't afford this bond to put up, right? This is where legislation is problematic. And this is what will happen. And they'll get a bunch of exceptions. They'll be like, hey, if we're working on a sequel, we don't want to have to give up the code. We don't have to give it to anybody. And probably for really valid reasons, because if you're working on a sequel, this multiplayer, you probably have a bunch of stuff in there you're going to reuse. And the hacks and everything else will be so much easier if people have access to it, right? Look what happened to certain other people. Right? So you're not going to want that. You're going to have that exception. And what does it mean to be working on a sequel? Well, whatever you want it to mean, right? Right? So you want to work with these people. I got an example that's going to show you a little bit of both sides of that, right? But you want to be working with them, because otherwise how this comes out of legislation is going to be punitive to the small guys and benefit the big guys. And often the benefit of the big guys is throwing money at it. So if something costs, you got to put up a bond and it costs $1 million, it's nothing to them, right? There's a point where I cared about every dollar, and I had no money. And I remember finding $5, and it was like the greatest thing ever, because now I could go buy, all we were eating back then was potatoes and cans of soup. We'd get like cream of broccoli and put it over the potato. So we had a mix of things, right? And you know what that $5 meant? It meant back in 1991, we could go eat something else. Today, I can go to the store and I could go buy anything I wanted to go eat, because that $5 is meaningless to me, right? And the same thing with these companies. Whatever they put up and they propose is going to be meaningless to them. So they'll pay it, because who cares? But it'll punish all the small people, and it'll make the small people have to come to the large people and say, can you be of record, right? and those kind of things, right? So, okay. So what you want to do is you want to approach these companies and work with them. Again, think of them as partners, not the enemy. And again, this is the thing I will not get over, the approach to this, right? Think of them as partners, that you both have the goal. And when you have a goal and you actually care about the goal, you eat a lot of shit along the way. You always do. So this means you're going to go up to executives that you don't really like and be like, hey, you know, Care Bears Volume 3 Super Splatter and how you aren't working on that anymore? Can we host that servers for you so people can still play it? Right? Like, that's what you're going to have to do. And you're going to have to go and find some game that you can get them to agree with. And you want to solve their problem. Their problem is a PR problem of shutting down a game. Solve it for them, but solve it for a way that works for them. One, you can't just give the code out to everybody who owns the game. Only people who bought the game should have access to it, right? Or are we talking about that we just want to put this on and make it totally open for everybody, right? I don't think that's the goal, right? So if you bought the game, right, this is what we keep talking about, that you should have access to it. So, okay, that's actually a pretty easy thing to solve if you're an entity that can then do calls against other entities back end, right? And you can verify ownership, you can connect accounts, you can do all of that kind of stuff. So that's solvable. We're getting somewhere. And now the Care Bears Volume 3, I should have made the game name so long so I could remember it. We can play now, right? Because we know you owned it. You own it. Awesome. So now we're going to put you up on the servers. And hey, you know what? We are pro-consumer. And so we're going to really have good terms. We're going to open it up. It is not going to be punitive to the player at all. You own this forever. We can never take it away from you. We can never deny you access. And then all the hackers go crazy and cheaters, and it goes to hell. So, wow. I understand for end of life, those terms that people are angry about are horrendous. For actual day-to-day, they protect the other players, the good consumers, because you want to be able to remove some players from your ecosystem because they're cheaters and they're lousy human beings. We all know this if you play actual games online, right? Let's be clear. This is only, a lot of what I'm talking about is only going to resonate with people who actually play modern games online and not just talk about them. But you need the ability to get rid of cheaters. And this is one way of it, right? And people laughed at me when I mentioned this at places. I'll just say places. And it's just like, oh yeah, what am I going to do? Go ask you? Yeah, you are. So I worked for a nonprofit, Citizen Action, back in the 90s. And one of the things we were trying to do back then, when organic food existed, was try to get organic food into grocery stores, because there's organic farmers in Ohio that couldn't get their food in the store. So now it was easy for us to get into the little guys. The Russo brothers, right there, they're all around. Or the Russo brothers, are they filmmakers? Yeah, there's the local chains. But we wanted a big player to win. So we reached out to Safeway, and we worked with Safeway. And Safeway actually agreed that we could go in and audit if they had the organic food out they said they had. So that would mean some level of things. And for that, they would get some promotion out of us, and they would get like some back and forth, some community goodwill. And they agreed. So we did it. Now, eventually, right, organic, this becomes this whole legislation, big business, the incentives that will always be crappy, is they, of course, eventually made it where organic is a meaningless term, because they're like, well, hang on. These little organic farmers are making a lot more per bag of corn they sell. Why don't we become organic farmers or just buy them? And then, well, we don't really want to do the organic thing. That's kind of a pain in the ass. Let's just change what organic means. And that's essentially what happened, right? And that's why the word organic means a lot less in the U.S. now than it used to, even certified organic, because it's changed. And to be clear, if I'm ever going to be a farmer, there's a local farmer's market where I met a farmer who does no-till farming. He just plants the stuff, and then it's renewable, doesn't touch it, doesn't do anything to it. That's the kind of farming I could get behind doing. But that's one way of doing it, right? And so that's like working with them. It's going to subvert and get weird, but yet the end goal, the start goal was pretty good. The end goal there, I don't know, but that shows like working with these big companies, but also shows these weird perverse incentives. And incentives are always hard to overcome because everybody's going to play their game to get it to work for their advantage, right? And the big companies always have the advantage on this. But let's say you got this going and you got your games going, and then does this mean that what if somebody new wanted to come? Would you not let them buy the game? But again, right, we're talking for all of this to exist. And this is hand waving over a whole bunch of stuff. And it's so much of it, I don't even know if this is a good idea, is you still need this central something to be the legal entity to connect and have this ownership of this so that we can have this to enforce copyright, even if you're not going to enforce it. Right. And right now, let's be clear. If I wanted to go play that game mode in COD that I always forget the name of, I really did like it for I cannot remember the name. There's a bunch of great servers I could do it on. And EA kind of looks away. They're like, yeah. And that's kind of how it works now. And so if you're playing those kind of games, you could, right? But if you're going to formalize it and do all this other work, you can do this other stuff. And that would be a kind of cool charity, I think. That would be a kind of a cool thing that you're solving a problem. Remember, I always talk about solving a problem. People love when you solve a problem. And you're working with the developers, and guess what? They can then donate you money. They can do a tax write-off on it. Like, there's a whole bunch of big boy shenanigans you can get into. But also, guess what? You don't get to say that you're saving anything, except maybe those occasional games. You don't get to be a hero. It's a bunch of slog. It's a bunch of crappy work. Like, I've worked with museums in New York, London, Seattle. I've talked to directors at length sometimes. Actually, Cleveland, I wanted to, and we just didn't get that to happen. Actually, I worked with, Cleveland Institute of Art. But, like, I've worked with these people, and it is unglamorous. We all talk about it. Like, it's a slog to do that side of it. So to do this other side with EA is probably going to be a little bit more glamorous, but it's still a slog. It's not exciting, but this is working with developers, and means then you could also work with small developers in the same way and not have them have some kind of punitive legislation that they've got to deal with. Right? A lot of when I think about these kind of problems is I try to think of how do we align incentives? And sometimes incentives, you just have to ask everyone to ask rationally and it works out. Here's a weird incentive. There's local farmers market, West Seattle. A lot of the farmers, including organic farmers, donate their leftover food at the end of the day to the White Center Food Bank. So should I not shop at them so that more food gets donated to the food bank? But if nobody shops at them, then nothing's going to get donated to the food bank because those farmers are going to stop going to this farmer's market. So what we have to ask is everybody to act rationally. And my potatoes and my dish I just ate came from the farmer's market. It was organic. Then it works. And so that's why you need to have a relationship with these people so that you can look each other in the eye and go, we understand the really perverse incentive that you can go play here. But be cool, man. Be cool. Right? And again, there's a whole host of things like the game for sale is a big question for me. But also what this does then is people want to say about saving games and preserving games and every game is precious and why don't you as a developer and then yell at me that they're not going to buy my game and fuck me and I hope my game fails. Let's be clear, right? Let's be clear. Not every game needs to be saved. Not every game needs to exist forever. Some developers might not want to. They might want to pull a Banksy and have their game implode at the end of it. That's their right. Right? But also, I don't want to put a bunch of undue burden on small developers who are trying to make a game that appeals to people and gets people to play so they can instantly start caring about their end of life. And you're going to say, oh, we'll just waive it for all. Like, oh, trust me. Remember the login that I started this with. I can show you numerous examples of how this works out. And so, again, I am not saying that this is how you solve this problem. It's a complicated problem, and I don't know if there's a right solution for everything. Do we need to play NFL 2K 19? I forget when that stopped playing. Whatever, right? Like, do we need to play that version of it? Or do we need to play all versions of it? Is the latest? Is like it's messy. But if you're working with a developer, they're probably going to give you a lot more messiness in there, right? But again, you can't have different versions connect and play together. How do you do matchmaking? Because these aren't museums that you're walking through, but you want to actually have the experience of playing them. And yes, I have entirely ignored single player games and online components for it because clearly that's a much easier problem to solve if you want to solve that problem. I'm talking about multiplayer because that's the kind of things that I make and the kinds of things I think about. And I think about, which my original video was about, the number 3. I think about the goal. I think about the preservation and online end-of-life access. And I am willing to eat a lot of crap on the way to get there. Because those steps to get there aren't the goal. The goal is this thing. And so, no, I don't think punitive legislation is the goal. Essentially, I think it's ineffective and it's anti-developer. And you're going to say, you're mischaracterizing it, you're creating a straw man. And I'm going to say, if you yell fire in a movie theater and cause a riot, you don't get to say, I didn't yell, start a riot. You were just the cause of that. And when I look at that, that is how I react to what's happening. I think going after legislation is the worst way to go about this problem. And hopefully, if you listen to all of this, you can have some understanding that I've actually worked on this problem and I actually care about this problem. And it's the longest video I've ever made. And I'm probably repeating myself a fucking million times because I don't make videos this long because I'm not smart enough to not repeat myself. But that's where I come out on this. And so no, like, well, you should work with people to, no. You're asking me to, like, hey, is the punctuation correct in Mein Kampf? And ignoring what it's about. No, I'm not going to ignore what it's about. It's the wrong approach. It's something I'm opposed to. But I'm not opposed to the preservation of games and the long-term access to end-of-life of games in a way that reflects of what they actually were. Because again, if you play Neo Tokyo just walking around the map, it's not the same as if you play Neo Tokyo with a group of people and you're like, this is awesome. And that's hard to do. And there's a bunch of crap involved in doing it. So why don't I do this? Why don't you? I make games. I care about the future of games. I care about the people and helping new games get out there and spend a lot of time doing that, as well as I've listed, the times when I could have some influence and help in this industry, I have. So why don't you? You can do it. You can do it. Because it's not as easy as signing a petition. I'm not pleading to your emotion. I'm not telling you you're a hero and I'm a hero and we're going to change the world. I'm telling you, it's a shitload of crap ahead of you if you want to do this and make a difference. But you got to start doing it and just do it. And who are you to do it? And I don't know. Just do it. Right? And you'll learn a bunch along the way. And again, maybe it isn't a charity. Maybe it isn't a nonprofit that's doing this. Maybe it's some other method of doing this. But you don't get to say I'm wrong because I'm not doing it. I mean, sure, you can. Yeah, I'm also... Can I ask you before we go? Because this is like 30 minutes now, or even longer. Dear God. I'm a corporate sellout. Can someone tell me where I get my corporate sellout check? Because I have not been able to figure that out. And I want to be able to make sure I can get that cash. And no, my game is not a game as a service. But please say that. Please say that I'm mischaracterizing this. Please say I don't know what I'm talking about. Please say I'm against trying to save games and make end-of-life access available. Because it's easier. That's super easy. So there you go. This is like 17. Like Ken Burns should be editing this documentary. As I was editing that, I have an addendum that I have to add. Obviously, all of this is super, super PC base focused. It becomes a lot more complicated when we start talking about the consoles and what they can do and the power they have. So for instance, our game, the Anacrusis, when we went peer-to-peer, we simply had to say, if there's 4 people, we really don't want the Xbox S to host because it can't. It will suffer underneath where the X could. And all these solutions we talk about kind of ignore like all the access and everything else for console players who make up a large portion of this industry, but we just ignore them in these conversations, or at least think of them in a different way. And I think a lot of people think, because in their heads they're thinking, well, we have a disc. But obviously that doesn't mean anything either. But there you go. That's something that we're not considering in any of this that I just ignored, but is super important. I just want those people not to feel left out, that I think a solution needs to think about those players and how you navigate through all of that again, which is why you want to work with the big players, because you want to make it available. Because I didn't even get into the whole thing that I think if you get to see people won't even go buy or get a free game on Epic because they want it on Steam, I think you understand that we're talking long-term. This is about accessibility to seeing and being able to download these things, as well as that connection. But again, I already talked for 72 hours. So I kind of tried to cut it short and trim some of that. But again, this is super, super dense and lengthy problem that I'm punting and ignoring a whole bunch of stuff. And I don't even know it's the right idea. But I just want to make sure that people understand that all of that comes into play. And it is a really complicated problem. And why am I not looking at the camera now all of a sudden either? I don't know, man. I'm going to have to play with Boris all afternoon to make up for this, because I don't know if you can hear him. That little dude, he needs his breakfast. Oh, no, we're on lunch. Brunch.